dads don't get a lot of research done on them. However, we are starting to realize that dads are really important and just as important as moms, and they're influencing the way that their child is developing. They're getting information. Kids are getting information from dads through social referencing, of course. Um, they're understanding, different things about the world. We'll probably talk in the next chapter about how dads often have more like rough and tumble play with the kids and things. So kids are learning a lot of they're learning a lot about the world through the lens of dad. That's not to say they're not learning without a dad. I'm certainly not advocating for that. Every family situation is certainly unique, um, and kids are going to have a good experience no matter if they have a father figure in the picture or not. So several theories of psychosocial development. We'll look now at Freud and his psychoanalytic theory. So basically, Freud thinks that kids go through these 4 stages throughout childhood, and that's how they develop, and then they're basically done developing after childhood. So we'll talk more about him in the coming chapters, but for these 2 stages, so the oral stage in the first year, basically he's saying that the mouth is the baby's primary source of gratification, which is true. In the first year, everything comes from the mouth. Their food, they start to laugh. Everything's happening through the mouth. So basically, if they're not getting their basic needs met, if they're not getting fed on a regular schedule, if they want for food, Freud thinks that they may end up developing an oral fixation later in life as an adult. And what that would be as an adult, you may develop this oral fixation. So maybe that's the need to eat or drink a lot or chew on something. You constantly have to have something in your mouth. He talks about, he thinks that people who smoke cigarettes have an oral fixation. People who bite their nails or have to find themselves constantly talking. Thinks that these people didn't have their needs met, and so they have developed this fixation as an adult. And then the anal stage in the second year. So the primary focus in the second year for the baby is that their pleasure. He believes that their pleasure comes from gaining control over your bowel movements. So once you learn to do that, you should be smooth sailing. But he says if that goes awry in any way, Freud thinks that you're then going to develop this anal personality. So maybe you have like OCD tendencies. You feel a need for control in certain things. Maybe you feel the need to clean all the time or have a stick to a perfectly consistent schedule, things like that. And again, I wouldn't take too much stock into these because more or less I think they've been debunked, but we still talk about them quite regularly when we're talking about development. Other theories, so psychosocial theory and Erikson, he kind of, I think we've mentioned, he moved away a little bit from the Freudian sexual and aggressive urges push, and he says that, you do have a conflict at each age stage. Um, and that will then go ahead and affect the rest of your development, whether or not that was met or not. So, in the first stage, you have trust versus mistrust. So, and this is basically really at the core, am I getting my needs met or am I not? If my needs are being met, I am going to develop a general trust about the world. If my needs are not being met, then maybe I start to get fearful and nervous, and kind of develop this mistrust. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. So they're a little bit older, and kids now want to be independent. So, are they able to get control over their actions? Are they able to walk and talk and control their environment in whatever way they feel is appropriate? If so, they'll develop this sense of autonomy. If not, they might start to feel pretty down on their abilities, and that's where the doubt comes in. So early problems. So he says if there are early problems with both trust and autonomy, then you may turn into an adult who is suspicious and pessimistic, or who is easily shamed. We've already mentioned Bandura and like the Bobo doll study and observational learning. But basically, this is saying that we are taught, kids are learning through the environment. So through reinforcement, through punishment, um, we learn by watching other people. We learn by what what we get from TV and from advertisements and from parents and from friends. There's so many things that go into it. Really, all of these environmental influences. We do teach gender roles pretty early on. They really start before you're even pregnant, usually, and then it even exacerbates once the baby's born. You have a baby shower and everything's pink or everything's blue. And then we encourage girls to do this and boys to do this. Well, girls do this. Well, boys do this. And just on and on and on. And we really teach that certain gender roles are for boys and certain gender roles are for girls. But at the end of the day, we do have to remember that gender roles are not biological. Gender roles are socially constructed. So we've created those roles in order to better understand people. Sometimes we end up putting them in a box. And it makes it easier to categorize people. We're always looking to categorize things. We like to be in the know at all times. So, effects of parenting. Proximal parenting is going to just be proximal. I always think of as close. So, in close proximity. So, physically being close to the baby, holding them, touching them. Distal is going to be a little bit more distant. We're looking to create that individualism very early on. There's not a lot of nurturing or communication. Often kids who have distal parents, the kid ends up being pretty self-aware of themselves, but they are often less obedient. They're not used to structure or rules. So that can be something certainly to think about as they get older.